I'm going to discuss an incident that took place recently in Rotherham town centre, which I think is a good example of the controversy around non-crime hate incidents and their usage by police. And I'm going to read out a press release by a group called Christian Concern because the individual involved was a Christian preacher. Um, there is some stuff here you might wonder what's the relevance, but it taps into just the background of this particular incident. It is a little bit specific to Rotherham, whereas I think this is part of a wider problem. But nevertheless, I'll read it out. It's been reported in other sources, numerous other sources, and I believe there's footage online, which if I can find, I'll put a link to that as well. Um, I'll just say from the outset, I have a big problem with the usage of non-crime hate incidents, particularly that word hate. It's a very loaded term. So if you don't watch the rest of this video, if you want to just, watch this first part of my video, what's your thoughts? I think that these are overly used by the police. I mean, hate's a very loaded term. If someone's engaging in an antisocial manner or a threatening manner, that can already be dealt with. I think this is a serious threat to free speech. Um, and the fact that someone could be criminalized simply for holding an opinion is deeply alarming. Anyway, I'm going to read this out. Yes, it is something of a biased source because it's from Christian Concern, but the vindication aspect is the fact that charges have been dropped. Um, if this incident was about some street preacher coming up and aggressively imposing themselves on another person, I wouldn't have much sympathy with them. But that isn't what happened in this case. We're not talking about someone behaving in a threatening way. Um, I think that the police have a right to, or not so much have a right to, but there's a ground to follow up if someone makes a formal complaint. So if you have in this case the hijabi woman coming up to the police and say, I feel threatened or I feel uncomfortable by the questions this man has asked me, then yeah, the police have a responsibility to act on that. They can't just leave it if someone said that. But I also think they need to utilize common sense. And I think the worst thing about this case, and no doubt in other cases, is the police immediately went in and assumed guilt. It's their job to ascertain what the situation is, not to just go in and automatically side with one party over the other. Um, Frankly, my impression is this woman was being too sensitive. Can't stand someone having a different opinion to hers. Um, I see no evidence this guy was acting in a threatening way. I think it would be clear if he was, and his whole demeanour in the exchange with the police did not indicate that at all. He wasn't yelling, he wasn't acting like a thug in any way, shape, or form. So we also there was that incident in the south. I forget the town now, but where six uniformed officers actually went to someone's house, this couple's house, because they had a feud with their daughter's school. I mean, this is the sort of thing that's happening. Um, I think the non-crime hate incident should be completely abolished, and existing legislation about antisocial behaviour should be used. But I think it's very obvious that non-crime hate incidents are being abused. This has also come at a time, incidentally, when we've seen a 20% increase in shoplifting, and the police have done a damn thing about that. If goods are worth less than £200, they just won't act on it. Yet they seem to find the time and resources to harass members of the public for essentially having an opinion. It's deeply concerning, and I think that Labour's record on this, I think the Labour government's in denial. When people say there is threats of freedom of speech in this country, Starmer's response was, "We have a proud tradition of freedom of speech in this country." So basically evasive. There is a serious problem here. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to read this out because it gives more context about what precisely happened. Like I say, you could argue the source is biased, but it's been reported in numerous other sources. This is just going into a bit more detail. Here we go. The reports, Christian Concern, there's no report named. Um, Christian preacher vindicated after arrest, prosecution, and non-crime hate incident threat for questioning Quran. Here we go. Christian street preacher John Steele has been vindicated after the Crown Prosecution Service dropped charges against him following his arrest in Rotherham Town Centre for asking a member of the public what Quran says about domestic violence. The incident captured in police body cam footage, which led to Mr Steele being detained and threatened with a non-crime hate incident, um, NCHI, will spark widespread and escalating concern over policing priorities, and the erosion of Christian freedom in the UK. Like I say, they're coming in with a Christian angle, but this affects a lot of people in the country, not just um, Christians. The story reveals embedded two-tier policing in Rotherham. Over many years, South Yorkshire Police have failed to act on the systemic rape of young girls by predominantly Islamic men, but on this occasion swiftly arrested a Christian preacher for asking a question about the Quran. Just briefly on that point, that Islamic men, it's specifically Pakistani men. But yeah, that's the story also shed further light on policing and community cohesion in Rotherham after it was revealed that a Labour activist, Mubin Hussain, awarded an MBE for services to integration, called on Muslims in Rotherham who refused to boycott the police following the town's grooming scandal to themselves be boycotted by the Muslim community. That doesn't sound to me like someone being particularly productive in building bridges. You know, if he's saying that Muslims who actually don't want to boycott the police should be themselves boycott, that doesn't sound particularly productive. John Steele, 60, who's being supported by lawyers at the Christian Legal Centre, is a former minor and long-serving bus driver. He was arrested on the 21st of June 2025 after engaging in a 30-second conversation with a Muslim woman wearing a hijab at a public awareness stall offering support to ethnic minorities, Pakistani women experiencing domestic abuse. So this was actually in the context of the event. It's not like he just went up to some random Muslim woman and started saying these things. It was actually in the context of the event, which I wasn't even aware of until now. That is significant. Mr. Steele, who has preached the gospel in public spaces for 25 years without incident, asked, using a small microphone in Rotherham town centre, how Islamic teachings on wife beating could be reconciled with the stall's message. He was referring to the controversial verse in Quran 4:34, which says, "Men are in charge of women because Allah hath made the one of them excel the other, and because they spend of their property for the support of women. So good women are the obedient guarding in secret that which Allah hath guarded. As for those from whom ye fear rebellion, admonish them and banish them to beds apart and scourge them. Then if they obey you, seek not a way against them. Lo, Allah is the ever high, exalted, great." This is a Pickfall translation, which is widely regarded as the most faithful translation of the Quran in English. Often Muslims will say, "Oh, it's taken out of context." Well, that's deemed to be the most faithful translation of the Quran. Mr. Steele then shared with the woman how, in comparison, Paul the Apostle commands Christians to love their wives in the same way that Jesus loves the church, Ephesians 5:25. He said he shared what he did to offer hope and understanding, as it is well known that the majority of Muslim women do not engage with or learn some of the Quran's concerning teachings. Despite the brief and non-threatening nature of the exchange, an hour later he was surrounded by 4 police officers demanding his personal details and threatening him with arrest if he failed to comply. And I've seen that footage. They weren't aggressive per se, but they were quite pushy in terms of getting those details. Um, the motivation for getting Mr. Steele's details appears to be to record an NCHI against his name. In the body-worn footage of the arrest, Mr. Steele can be seen holding a banner quoting verses from the Book of Acts and 1 Timothy. "The world has gone mad," Mr. Steele said, excuse me. "This is the world we live in," the police officer responded and added, "I think that it was your delivery." "I asked a simple question," Mr. Steele said calmly and politely. And that's true. He was calm throughout this exchange with the police. The police officer, however, said that his question was antisocial. Therefore, Section 50 of the Police Reform Act 2002 allows a uniformed officer to require a person to provide their name and address if they have reason to believe that the person is or has been engaging in antisocial behaviour. If you don't provide your details, we have a power of arrest to obtain those details. I'll come back to this point. "I haven't behaved in an antisocial behaviour manner," Mr. Steele said. "That's your opinion," the officer snapped back. "We are recording an incident," the female officer interjected. "That incident is a hate incident. We require details to report that." "I'm not admitting to something I have not done," Mr. Steele said. "What you are doing is threatening me." The police said, "We're saying you behaved in an antisocial manner because the Muslim woman felt harassed, alarmed, or distressed by your behaviour. Referring to the decision in June by MPs to make it lawful to allow abortion up to birth, Mr Steele said, "Can you go and arrest all of them in Parliament? They've caused me alarm and distress." I'll briefly mention this point. Whatever you think of that issue, this gets into the principle of what the police are doing. They're justifying their actions arresting Mr Steele on the grounds that the woman says she felt harassed. Well, a Christian who disagrees with that legislation might say the MPs putting forward that legislation is affecting them. This is, to me, a very dangerous slope because anyone can make any charges against anyone and simply say, I felt uncomfortable. Go and arrest that person. Um, I'll get back to the thing about common sense. So, um, see, we're dealing with this right now, the officers responded in unison. After being told he is not guilty of a hate crime, Mrs. Steele asked, so what is going down as a non-crime hate incident? The police officers respond. So they're sort of contradicting themselves. They say he's not guilty of a hate crime, and yet he's being charged with a hate incident. I'm not hating anybody, Mrs. Steele responded. Why should I have something against me that I haven't done? She says she has been harassed and alarmed and distressed by your behaviour, the officer said. Does that make me guilty, Mrs. Steele asked. No, the police officer said. They keep contradicting themselves. As an aside, a female officer then said to another officer, common sense might prevail when we do lock him up. That female officer is obviously a petty tyrant, and she, that's the sort of attitude that is going to cause public concern. Refusing to give his details, he was arrested under Section 50 of the Police Reform Act 2002 and led away to a police car. Taken to the police station, he was detained, fingerprinted, and DNA swabbed, like he's a dangerous criminal. A court date was set, but the CPS has since discontinued the case, stating that prosecution was not needed in the public interest. Occasionally, the CPS gets it right. I've spent 25 years trying to help people understand Jesus' love. Commenting on his experience in vindication, Mr. Steele said, I've spent 25 years trying to help people find love, hope, and forgiveness. It annoys me when reports just repeat a point. That's just an aside. Through Jesus Christ, I've seen the devastation caused by abuse, and I wanted to speak truth and love. Excuse me. Instead, I was treated like a criminal. Mr. Steele himself has a backstory of Christian redemption. A former heavy drinker and militant during the 1984 miners' strike, he became a born-again Christian in 1987 after reading Psalm 7. Since then, he has dedicated his life to sharing the gospel, often at personal cost. On what it was like being arrested, he said, I was shocked and gobsmacked. How can asking a question be labelled as hate? Hate is a strong word. If I haven't done anything wrong, why was I treated like a criminal? I couldn't get my head around it. It was degrading. They took my DNA and fingerprints for what? A 30-second conversation. It wasn't about me. It's about the erosion of our hard-won freedoms and the right to speak truth and love. I've never been arrested in 25 years. I wasn't there to cause trouble. I was there out of love, to share hope and to help people understand the love of Christ. When I heard the charges were dropped, I was relieved but also angry. So much time, energy, and stress wasted for nothing. I go because people are hurting. I won't let fear silence the gospel. This country was built on the Bible. We need boldness and must not be intimidated in this hour. Andrea Williams, chief executive of Christian Legal Centre, condemned the police action, saying, we welcome the fact that this case has now been dropped, but should never been progressed as far as it did. This is a clear and disturbing example of two-tier policing. It is both irrational and lawful for officers to threaten members of the public with so-called non-crime hate incidents simply for expressing lawful and peaceful views. The irony could not be more striking. A Christian preacher is arrested for questioning Islamic beliefs in the very town where police failed for years to protect vulnerable girls from Islamic grooming gangs. South Yorkshire Police are once again undermining public trust. We will be investigating whether a hate incident has been wrongly recorded against John's name despite his complete vindication. I think they should go further. I think they should take a legal case against the police and offer him some sort of compensation for the distress caused. I mean, I don't know if he'll now have a criminal record because he was arrested. So here's the thing. I felt it was important to read all of that out to give further context. Some people might not like street preachers. They might find them annoying. They might find them a little bit arrogant. But fundamentally, I think they're harmless. I've never felt threatened by them. I can understand if a street preacher is railing against homosexuality and a gay person would be offended by that and hurt by that. Um, so it's not, I'm a Christian, but it isn't the way I would go about things. But fundamentally, I mean, the police contradict themselves. They say, no, you're not guilty of a hate crime, but we're arresting you for a hate incident. Now, that's fundamentally contradictory. Initially, I thought, well, maybe he was just being a bit awkward by not giving his name, but then there's a valid reason for that. He gives his name, they then have his data, and therefore it's a criminal record. And this is a guy who's never been arrested in 25 years. Um, I think it is deeply, deeply alarming. And I think, frankly, I used to think this is just coming from the top. It's police chiefs, and then officers have to just do what they're told. I'm not sure that's entirely the case. I do think that there is some police chiefs who have wholly the wrong priorities, but I also think individual officers, quite frankly, are overzealous, and I think individual officers lack common sense. Now, again, I don't begrudge the police for following up on what the woman said. They had a responsibility to speak to the man, they had a responsibility to ascertain what was going on. What I think is a disgrace, an absolute disgrace, and shames South Yorkshire Police. I mean, it's making me angry, and it doesn't even, I wasn't even directly involved. The fact that they arrested this guy, treated him like a dangerous criminal, took fingerprints, a DNA swab. This is Orwellian. This is Britain in 2025. And fundamentally, what was it about? Asking a question. Now, the officer said it's the tone in which you asked it. Well, they weren't there. They were simply believing what she said. Again, they had a responsibility to follow up. But this is not the first time I've seen footage of the police acting in this way. There was another incident in London, was high profile, about 2 years ago, I think, at St Pancras Station, when the musician Brendan Kavanagh was playing on a public piano, and a group of overzealous officers came over and started telling him he couldn't say things because he got into this heated engagement with some Chinese students. The Chinese students were angry because they said he was playing anti-China songs. But one of the students was very aggressive, yelled at the man, was acting in a very obnoxious way, and was demanding um, that he didn't film in a public place, even though it was clearly a public place. And that whole incident, what was striking was a female officer, a student with the British Transport Police, um, immediately said, "You can't say that." I think the public are sick and tired of individual officers acting like judges, taking it on themselves to decide that someone's guilty. The job of a police officer, as far as I'm concerned, is to assess a situation. Now, the officers here say they weren't saying that he's guilty. Why then arrest him? I think, frankly, some police officers look for an excuse for easy policing. This is not to be disrespectful to those officers who do risk their lives and do get involved in dangerous situations. But frankly, arresting a middle aged street preacher who is not being aggressive is a lot easier than dealing with, a criminal gang who's shoplifting. It's an easy thing for the police to do, and then they just hide behind the fact, well, he didn't give us details, so we can arrest him. I think it's disgraceful. Shame on you, South Yorkshire Police. I think it's one of the worst forces in the country. The way they handle things, the same force during the pandemic, I remember again, overzealous officers going into a man's yard and accusing him of not social distancing his own front yard. This wasn't a public place. Um, South Yorkshire Police, I think, is one of the most overzealous forces in the country. This force has come up time and time again for this sort of behaviour. Um, so I do think there's some variation in police forces, but this isn't just in Rotherham. We've seen this across the country, different locations. Police jumping on non-crime hate incidents to basically make easy arrests. It's an absolute disgrace. Like I say, at a time when we've seen 20% increase in shoplifting. Now, the other thing that needs to be looked at is the fact that someone can simply say they feel uncomfortable for the police to make an arrest. or to harass another person. But it then escalates to arrest because they'll find any excuse for that. Um, so, for instance, I can say this person's maybe uncomfortable. Um, Go and arrest them. And then the police will go and do that, and I might have simply had an argument with someone. Now, I do think if someone's being aggressive, if they're getting in someone's face, that's unpleasant, and that can definitely be justifiably seen as antisocial behaviour. But someone engaging in a theological debate in public, asking a question, simply asking a question, I would suggest this Muslim woman was being too sensitive and no doubt using the Islamophobia narrative to, because she didn't like the fact he was a Christian. She could have simply disagreed with him. She could have said, "No, sir, that you're wrong about that, or you've misunderstood the quote, or something like that." You know, if she's so zealous about wearing a hijab, if she feels it's her, religious liberation, then why is she so insecure that she feels the need to run to the police because someone's asked her a question? You know, um, I say that doesn't make her come across very well. And particularly when this stall was specifically about domestic violence, it's just ironic. Um, Now, like I say, not everyone will agree with Christian concern, and some might argue the Christian church hasn't got a glowing history of treating women well either, but that's all a theological debate. The issue here is free speech. The issue here is the usage of non-crime hate incidents. And I think I want to see them abolished because if they are abolished, the police have no excuse to act like this. But I do think there should be criticism and scrutiny of the police when they do this. I think he should go further. I think he should actually take legal action against the police for emotional distress. If the police start losing money, they start finding themselves hit by legal actions. Maybe they'll stop doing this. And that officer who said maybe we should arrest him and that would be common sense, I think she needs to be investigated for professional misconduct. I think these officers just thought this is an easy arrest. This is it's easy to harass this guy. I think a lot of police officers, frankly, lack common sense in this country. It's infuriating. Um, this happens time and time again. I mean, it makes you wonder how police are trained. It really does. But I think that I think they should face some sort of legal action for the emotional distress they've caused a man who's done absolutely nothing wrong. It's the same in that incident where I mentioned the uniformed officers went to the couple's house. The chief officer in that force, I think it was either Hampshire or Bedfordshire. Honestly, I can't remember off the top of my head, but regardless, Hertfordshire might be. It was one of the southern counties. But anyway, the chief officer said, in retrospect, we can understand why the public would be concerned by this, but no direct apology to the couple. Um, it is a serious matter of civil liberty when police abuse their power. It is a matter of serious civil liberty when someone is inconvenienced for hours being brought to a police station, having their information taken, treated like a dangerous criminal, when actual dangerous criminals are frankly getting away with things. I mean, the shoplifters aren't just stealing things, they're actually organised gangs. And to their disgrace, the police are doing nothing about this. Um, so, this is yet another example of um, the police shooting themselves in the foot and damaging public trust. Um, it's good that Mr. Steele's been vindicated, but there really has to be a lot more scrutiny of the police. Why are they approaching these cases that the CPS then drop? The CPS has got it right. They don't always get it right, but that's a traumatic experience to go through when you're not a criminal, to be treated like a criminal, to have this hanging over your head, simply for asking a question. That's the sort of thing that happens in totalitarian states. This is the United Kingdom. Shame on you, South Yorkshire Police. And NCHIs should be abolished. Um, like I say, I'm not criticizing the police here for following up and trying to understand what happened. But the problem is they immediately assume guilt. They immediately, despite what they claimed, it's very obvious that's what they were doing. Um, they immediately were hostile to this man. Immediately, um, treating him like a criminal. Disgraceful. Those officers are not fit to wear a uniform.